Yes, I think you've all heard the voice. Okay, so Tomer, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for the invitation. And I just want to say one correction. So I'm an assistant professor in the American University of Paris, not in the University of Luxembourg.
You're right.
Just a researcher.
Thank you for just a researcher. Well, it's already it's already a pretty challenging role, I would say, and especially the topic that you are trying to solve or trying to, I don't know, bring advancements to. Maybe let's start with some questions about the context. What is AI? How would you define it?
Okay, so I guess many of us know the general definition of AI, which means that machines demonstrate human intelligence. So everywhere where you see a machine or you have a machine demonstrating human intelligence, you call it artificial intelligence. This is very general, of course. You can see it in computers playing games like chess or Go, or recommending things on Amazon, or helping medical doctors understand if a goat is cancerous or not. So there are many, many applications. And therefore, I think that this definition is not very useful if we try to think how AI can help us. So,
sorry.
So if you think how AI can help us, I think a better way of considering it is by considering how we can reflect our intelligence on the machines. So I would say we have two kinds of human intelligence which are very correlated to what machines do. So let's take a quick example, and tell me if I'm talking too much and you want to move to the other question. I really like this forum where you have people from very many different backgrounds, and these discussions normally are very, very interesting. So you learn quite a lot of things. So I'm really looking forward to hearing all the ideas. So anyway, in order to understand what is artificial intelligence, I think that it's best to reflect on how our intelligence can be transferred into machines. And let's take an example. Let's assume that we want to go out of the house and we want to know if we need to take an umbrella or not. It's a very simple example, and we look at the weather forecast, but unfortunately it's inconclusive. So it tells us there is some chance we don't know. Very common in Luxembourg, for example. So what do? We need to make a decision. Either we take an umbrella or not. So one way of considering this problem is considering our previous experiences. Let's see what happened to us in the past when we took an umbrella, when the weather was inconclusive. We took an umbrella, and the times when we didn't take an umbrella, and how happy we were in each of the cases. So if we see that we were very happy always when we took an umbrella, we probably will use these experiences in order to take an umbrella in this case also. Otherwise, we probably will not take an umbrella. So this is learning. We learn from experiences. And on the other hand, you have another way of solving this problem. Let's assume that we, again, want to know if to take an umbrella, but we know that we hate to get wet. We don't want to get wet. This is an axiom in our thinking. So in this case, if there is a chance, we interpret now this inconclusiveness as a chance of getting wet, as a chance of rain. And therefore, we actually know we will always take an umbrella in this case. It doesn't even matter what happened in the past. We just don't want to get wet. So here we have some kind of knowledge or preferences on our side, and some kind of ability to interpret them in order to make this decision. So we made the same decision, let's say, but using two different mechanisms. And in my opinion, it's the best way to look at what is AI is to actually consider these 2 points. We have machine learning, which is very similar to human learning from experience, but it learns from data instead of experiences. Also sometimes from experiences, which are represented as data. And we have machine reasoning, which uses some kind of knowledge and preferences and some engine to reason over that to make decisions. So I think this is the best way to really understand how AI can help us, is to focus on these 2 aspects.
Okay, let me already ask a question to the audience. Voila, so I'm going to drop some questions in the chat. Feel free to answer them. And also if you have questions for our speaker, feel free to write them. Okay, so what about the legal domain? How can AI then help us to make decisions in this specific domain?
Right, so I think we should, I will still focus on these 2 domains, because machine learning and machine reasoning, because in fact they help us in very different ways, and they also have different strengths and weaknesses. So let's start from machine learning. How can machine learning help us? So in fact, learning help us in almost everything we do digitally, or even many times non-digitally. So you just improve many things by learning. So for example, if you look on legal research, there are lots of companies like LexisNexis and others which offer, among other things, semantic search for court cases, for example. What does it mean, semantic search? It means that they know to search for what you look for in a certain part of the court case, let's say the factual part, and not on the argument part, for example. How do they do that? Well, they use different parts with different algorithms, but they need to find out what are the facts of the case, and for that they apply machine learning. They teach the algorithm using previous cases and what are the facts, and then they can learn it for what are the facts for new cases. So this is very useful, and this of course helps a lot in decision making. And if you think about it, there are several weaknesses of machine learning, which I think some of them are very important for the legal domain. The first one, I would say, is bias. So when you learn yourself from experience, you have only limited experience, so you tend to make decision only of what you know. So it's very subjective. It's also very prone to bias. Additionally, you also have the problem of explainability. Right? This is a very important thing to understand why you make decisions. And in machine learning, many times this is the hardest part. It tells you something like you need to take an umbrella because you felt good last time. This is not a good explanation for the current time. So you don't really know why you should take an umbrella this time. And lastly, it's based on statistics. Based on the whole idea of machine learning is statistical information and models and distributions, and therefore it always have a margin of error, whether it's 5%, 40%. It's depending on the algorithm, but it can always make mistakes. So this is about machine learning, how it can help us. On the other hand, we have machine reasoning, and in fact, my background is machine reasoning, so I will focus more on this domain.
I think we could tell by the fact that you were pinpointing about what were the limitations of machine learning.
But we also have limitations for machine reasoning,
of course.
and mention. So machine reasoning is much less applied, in fact, in most of the places, and also in the legal domain. You can think of machine reasoning, for example, in the form of expert systems. So a lawyer wants to put his or her expertise in answering certain questions. For example, if consent was given lawfully for some research, scientific research you want to do. Okay, so this is a very specific question. It still has many exceptions, many side cases, but an expert can sit down and just say, okay, I put my expertise as a set of rules or in another form into the machine. Now I should be fair and say that this is also have very strong limitations, and they are very different. So the strong parts here is that you have explainability, and it's very rigorous. So if the expert is good, then there will be no mistakes. So it's up to the expert. But it's very, very expensive to make. So your expert needs to put all the cases, even the rare ones, all the exceptions, and then the expert needs also to translate it into code. So either the expert itself, the legal expert, is a programmer or a logician, or he or she teams up with one. So this is a big problem, and therefore those applications are always very focused and very limited on very specific domains like consent, lawfulness of consent for scientific details. So I should mention that both tools are not only for giving decisions, but they are also for helping the decision making. So we've seen that machine learning can help with legal research, and machine reasoning can, for example, build all the arguments for and against different questions that you might ask. So they can be used for decision making, and they can be used for supporting decision making.
Okay, but just before we go on, maybe I wanted to ask you, what if then in this, let's say in the second type of system that you are describing, so let's say more reasoning based, then what happens if there are certain cases, if we're talking about court cases, so case law, what if there are two cases that do not coincide, so they have like different outcomes because there were like different conditions and different interpretations of the judge, for example, but we're still talking about the same topic, which is consent. So what would the reasoning machine then do about this?
Right, so this is a very good question. So we have now information which give us very different advices. So you have many different solutions. So you have several solutions to solve it. First of all, you can just ask some kind of a human mediator to decide on which direction you want. Or the advantages of a machine is that it can actually follow both passes and give you two different, and try to develop them further and give you in parallel two different conclusions, which are based on these two different interpretations.
Okay.
So, of course, the machine itself cannot use inconsistent information to give you one decision, but it can compute as many decisions as required based on the different interpretations, even if they are inconsistent.
I think there are already a couple of persons also that have raised, let's say, challenges related to these kind of tasks. I see, for example, Sherez, she suggests that she uses machine learning in her research to extract arguments, so argument structures from text. And the challenge is subjectivity of this task. So it's a task that is highly subjective also for humans. Do you think that this is comparable to what you're talking about? Do you have similar experiences, or are these are not related?
No, it's clearly related. So it's very close to the bias I mentioned before. So machine learning, because it's, and Shoro mentioned that she's using machine learning. Machine learning always use data and experiences, and therefore it always will be subjective because it's based on this data that you're actually showing for the computer for training. Machine reasoning is less prone to bias, but of course, if the expert puts their own expertise and their own interpretation and they insert bias and subjectivity in their own interpretation on the machine reasoning side, then this could also be introduced. So you can also have bias in the machine reasoning. This is a very good point. But it's, in my opinion, it's a different form of bias. It's introduced by humans, and it can be avoided in a sense, while the one in machine learning is inherent to the approach of using examples, a finite number of examples.
And can you, how would you be able to avoid it? Like, if you, for example, by enlarging the pool of experts that would build the knowledge base, or how do you think that can be kind of counterbalanced?
So one of the ways is to have several, of course, experts discussing the different possibilities, different interpretations, for example. Another way is just to very closely follow the law, and if there are interpretations, try to be as complete as possible and represent all of them. So really be very close to the language of the law. So in reasoning, we put knowledge, we don't put examples. So we can actually go to the regulation, let's say the GDPR, and enter it into the machine. And if there are different interpretations, then we need to put all of them. And if there are different court cases, we need decisions. We need to put all of them. And therefore, we try to avoid this subjectivity, which is, of course, very important.
Let me also maybe read another comment by another participant. Using AI for decision-making in law, at least to assist the judiciary, is like adopting jurisprudence as a formal source of law. So the doctrine of the precedent. If the suggestions are not binding, they could greatly influence the practice, and the probable doctrine will be exceedingly hard to correct or adapt to new circumstances. Okay, yes, this is what we were also now saying before. It depends on what is based on the past, and it will be reproduced in the future. That does not fit very well with the civil legal tradition. That could eventually mean that the concrete case does not matter and its innumerable nuances, because the aggregate is what will be imperative.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if I understood properly this question, I understand it as AI normally uses previous court cases in order to advise lawyers, and there are some problems with that. And in fact, I don't know which tool is discussed here or the person with the question had in mind, but it doesn't have to be the case. So you can base AI also on the regulations themselves and even complete the court cases. And of course, AI can also combine different approaches, can combine both the court cases and the regulations. So it's clear that if you only base it on court cases, and I'm not sure I understood the question properly, so please correct me if I misunderstood it. But the sources, the uses of AI can be both on court cases, like we did with the legal analytics, with the legal research, but you can also capture the word of the law itself and use AI in order to understand and interpret it and suggest things to do based on the law, not on the court cases. Or you can combine them.
Maybe if we're talking about more practically about what is happening right now, what is happening these days, what is the current cutting edge technology in legal AI?
Right. So keeping this distinction between machine learning and machine reasoning, which I started at the beginning, and given that I'm not an expert in machine learning, but on machine reasoning, I would say everybody knows that machine learning is always progressing. There are various different from that, not only because the technology is getting better, but because they have more access to data. So if you know of tools right now, like LexisNexis and any other, they get better all the time. So I would say that it's very hard to point on something that is really groundbreaking, that really changed completely the way that people use these machine learning tools, as far as I know, but I'm not an expert in the field. When we consider machine reasoning, they are, as I mentioned before, they are much less used in the legal domain because they are much harder to create. So a recent development, let's say last 5 years, is to create, to automate processes without code. So they are called no-code process automation, robotic process automation. And there are various companies which do that, like Brighter or Neotalogic, for example. And what they do, they don't only handle with the law legal problems. They deal with all kind of process automation, but you can think of making a decision is a process. You need to get different input, you need to ask different questions. And if you can automate it without programming, then every lawyer can create an expert system like the concept we mentioned before without needing to know to code. So I think this is more on the groundbreaking level. And if you look on the websites of this company, we'll see that there are lots of legal firms, quite a few of legal firms that are using these tools. KPMG, PwC are among the two. I just scroll down and I've seen that they create different expert systems, which can be, and they don't need programmers for that. They don't need technical people, only legal experts. So I would say this is more on the cutting edge, this reason.
And if we're thinking about, I don't know, the near future or maybe longer future, what do you think will happen?
So the future, it's always easier to speak about the future because you cannot be, at least not now, corrected. So maybe it's better that I will take the experience of people who are very famous in this kind of predicting the future. So there is Kevin Ashley, for example. I recently read his book from 2017, and he foresees that the near future will use tools which are called cognitive computing apps. Okay, so what is cognitive computing? It's also very hard to define, much harder than artificial intelligence. My understanding of what cognitive computing is, when we try to solve, as a lawyer, we try to solve a problem, we don't only use one kind of learning based on one set of experiences or one kind of reasoning based on a certain kind of knowledge. We combine many different abilities in order to reach one conclusion, even for research, but certainly for making decisions. We use common sense, we use creativity, we use intuition, we use different types of experiences. And therefore, it's almost impossible to combine into that artificial intelligence, which are normally doing very specific things. So as far as I understand cognitive computing, and apparently they are not so common, they don't exist yet, but they are coming soon. They will integrate many different ways of AI and will also integrate the human intelligence itself into the process, either by integrating the human or the human will integrate the AI to the process. So the idea here is that it will still be artificial intelligence, but the cognitive process will be much bigger and will contain both human and machine intelligence, and the machine intelligence will come from many different sources. So I think, sorry.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense because that's what I was thinking. No, if we identify more or less as we did artificial intelligence, okay, of course, broadly and not very in a granular way, but you said in the beginning, artificial intelligence can be defined as machine learning or as machine reasoning, as if they were the only kinds of, and it kind of So it's the idea of replicating, let's say, or reproducing human intelligence. However, we cannot identify human intelligence to core to reasoning or to clear and like kind of economical, super how would you say that, like reasoning that does not depend, for example, on emotions, right? We also have emotional intelligence, we have creative intelligence, we have music intelligence, we have not all sorts of different intelligences. And whereas in the tradition, humans are thought to reason, and this is what, this is why we're different from other creatures. Actually, the human brain can do much more, right? So that's where I think it's very interesting to know that, also when we take decisions, it's not only rational decisions. I mean, there is a lot of research about the fact that actually rational decision making is more a myth than a reality, which does not make us like better decision makers or worse. It just, there are a lot of factors that influence how we take decisions. So, so of course, this is why it would be interesting to have, so if we are really trying to copy or to reproduce human intelligence, then yes, there is much more that we need to add.
Right. In fact, maybe we shouldn't copy, or it's impossible. I would say it's impossible to copy many of them.
To copy.
And maybe we shouldn't. We just need to find out these cognitive legal apps which can integrate these different kinds of intelligence in a smooth way. So a lawyer would not need to abandon their own ability to reason intuitively, or using emotions, or using their musical abilities, etc. But just integrate the good things that machines do well, and the good things that humans do well. This is the best future, and I think this is what Kevin Ashley really means. Like, this is a very good example. This is what Kevin Ashley really means when he says cognitive computing. Really letting everybody do what they do best in this sense, and be able to combine them.
Yeah. Okay. Of course, I invited the members of the audience to ask questions or to answer to the questions as I'm dropping there. But maybe, Tomer, so one of the reasons why we were very happy to have you here is that you do not only talk about these topics, but you're also developing an application. So you have a demo for, if I understand well, it's a demo for legal decision making. So it's an application for legal decision making. And so maybe you can tell us a bit more about what is its goal, what are the users, how do you envision to use this application, and why are you trying to develop it?
Sure. So indeed, in the University of Luxembourg, we develop a new tool. So we try to develop a new approach for supporting legal decision making. And in fact, it's also affected by these cognitive computing ideas. So we try to do this cognitive computing app from our point of view. And our point of view means that, yes, as we said before, decision making is a very complicated process. And we cannot envision a computer taking decisions in a way that will satisfy humans. But machines can actually do quite a lot of things to help the decision making, like legal research, for example, that we have seen. So we try to solve this problem in a different way. We try to separate the decision making from the questions that you need to answer in order to reach decision making. And the tool itself comes up with the most relevant questions based on the case, and based also on the distance to reach a conclusion. So if you can see that one question is really the terminal in reaching a conclusion, let's say guilty or not guilty, or complying or not, then we are going to ask this question to the lawyer and supply evidence. And if the lawyer wants to ask more or refine the question, the tool allows the lawyer to get more and more refining questions, or the lawyer can just satisfy the question by saying yes or no. So the tool tries to support decision making without making any decision. And in fact, this is the main goal. And we consider it as a cognitive computing approach according to how we understand it, but it's still in development. So we will see if it's there is a demonstration. I can make a quick demo later if it's interesting. But yes, I don't know if my explanation was clear enough to give an impression of the tool.
Maybe what I would like to add or to ask you is, why do you think it's so important that it's not the tool that takes the decisions? Why do you think this is a very important requirement for this application?
So I'm not a lawyer myself, but every time I talk with lawyers, they don't like tools making decisions. If they are based on learning, it's because of all the problems that we said before. And there are not so many tools using reasoning, but even if they use reasoning, many times the explanations are very complicated. They give explanations, but they are still very big and very hard to follow. So it seems, and as we said before also, the decision making is not only based on this kind of intelligence that machines can replicate, like learning and reasoning, but on intuition and common sense, ethical sense, or maybe also knowing the judge, knowing the court, time of day, after lunch, before lunch, all these kind of things affect decisions, and it's hard to think how a computer can really integrate it.
A lot of contextual information as well.
Yes.
It's true. Maybe, yes, would you like to maybe to show the demo so maybe people get a more precise understanding of what you're talking about, and maybe they also have questions about it.
So I can do a very quick one. Tell me
Yes.
if the...
We see it.
So the tool is called the League AI app. So you can find also the website at leagueai.app. And as I mentioned before, what it tries to do is it tries to come up with the questions, but let the decision making for the lawyer. So here we just put all the information. This is a very simple case about, not a simple case, but somebody broke into a house, was caught on security cameras, but then complained that you cannot use the recordings in court because no consent was given or nobody was asked. So the tool, first of all, use machine learning here in order to understand to interpret this free text into things that the machine understands. For example, the burglar is now called the data subject, the person who recorded called the controller, etc. And of course, the human can change, edit, add new properties. And now the tool tries to think, what's the most important question that leads you to either the processing was compliant with the law or not? So it finds out that Article 5 in the GDPR actually requires it to be fair, transparent, and lawful. So the human can just try to satisfy it if they know. So for example, they can say, we know from our own abilities for making decisions that this was fair, but we're not sure about transparency. So the tool recomputes the list of questions and finds that there is another article, number 23D here, which actually tells you that you can skip, or you have transparency, or you don't need transparency, if you deal with it, you did it in order to avoid a criminal activity. Okay, so you can just say here, this really fits my case, and you also satisfy the second point. Now, when you talk with lawfulness, you have no idea if it was lawful or not. So you really need lots of guidance here. So first of all, we need to check if it was actually personal data. Maybe recording is not even video recording is not personal data because of various reasons. So it gives you one court case where actually the recording was decided to be personal data, very similar case. You can also open the case and browse it. So you can say, okay, the case really fits my case. So you click here and there you have a counter argument. You weaken the chance that the case here holds. Similarly, you check if the processing itself is, the video processing can be considered processing. Again, a court case, and so forth and so on. You continue saying if you know things, if you don't know things. And the tool keeps asking questions or pointing you to court cases, but you make all the decisions. The tool doesn't, it's only coming with questions. It doesn't make any decision here. Okay, so here you can say yes. At the end, you actually, here you are being asked by legitimate interest, and the court case which says that there is legitimate interest here. So you can actually say that it's lawful, and then you can just go and if you want a court claim, you can also fill in what you want to claim. In this case, we just want to dismiss the action, and then you can generate a case report for internal use with all the information, or print a court claim and download it. Okay, so these are the ways you can use the tool in order to support decision making without making any decision. So it's in development, but we hope it will be interesting.
Maybe what I'm wondering is there are three things. Okay, what are you finding like very difficult? What are you finding challenging in the development of this tool? What are you going to do next? So how do you see the development, let's say in the next, 1 or 2 or 3 years? What would you need also in terms of, knowledge? And speaking about knowledge, I'm wondering, how can you be sure that you have all the knowledge there? In this sense, let's imagine that you all, for some reason, for example, because you only focusing on English, but there is a lot of case law in other languages, or for no other reason, maybe you disregard some of the knowledge that is needed, then, right, your knowledge base is incomplete. So then you may also be suggesting either not enough arguments, or maybe, I don't know, maybe there is an argument pro and there is not an argument against, but there should be. I don't know if I explained myself. How do we manage this uncertainty, this incompleteness?
So maybe I should start with this question, because I think this is a very important one. And one of the main problems why people don't use AI for decision making is this incompleteness. So the advantage of machine reasoning is that it's, as we said, is explainable. So part of the explanation can be, well, we are not sure. We give you this suggestion, but it was based on a court case, and there might be other court cases that we don't know about, let's say in French or in other languages, and it's up to you to check it. So we can here interact with the person, because we know the reasons. We know that we base this on some court case. We can tell the user, okay, there are other court cases. You don't have to trust us. You need to actually check yourself, because we might be incomplete here. So it's clear that regarding court cases, especially case law, it's clear that it's very hard to be complete. You have also lots of court cases which are not published, or very hard to reach, or very old, or very. So yes, incompleteness is something that you need to deal with, and the question is how. And our solution is to make it transparent, not transparent, but explicit. You have here a choice which is made on incomplete knowledge, and it's up to you to ensure it.
Yeah. Anyway, even human knowledge can be incomplete. I mean, these kind of tools are there to actually fill those gaps that cannot be filled by the limits of our cognition. So, of course, this is a problem in general. Maybe we have a question from the audience, which is the tool accessible to play with it?
So right now we have the technology, but we still don't have the knowledge. So you also ask, what are the next steps? So we have two main things that we are focusing on. We still have to improve a bit the technology. We also need to put in the right knowledge, because the tool is working very differently if you put it for data protection, for financial regulations, or for anything else. We do have legal experts in the team, two of them, which are right now working on the data protection law, but maybe this is not what we want to focus. So right now we are in the process of trying to focus the tool into the right domain, and we would be very happy if the people who are here now can give some advice. What do they think that we should focus regarding knowledge? Which domain they think that would be most interesting for the general legal population? The other thing that we want to develop is right now we have an editor which checks the quality of the knowledge inserted and allow humans to put their legal expertise, but this editor is still requiring some, not coding abilities, but logical abilities. So these lawyers that I mentioned are also trained logicians. We try to change it. So these lawyers work now on another editor. These lawyer logicians working on another editor, which will have terms in the legal language. For example, instead of saying this is an implication or whatever, or a disjunction, which is the legal language to say all this kind of thing, they will say this is a taxative obligation, which I don't even know what it is, because I'm not a legal person, but I've seen this kind of terms that they're using in order to create a new editor. So creating this editor will mean that a legal expert can create their own knowledge base. Our court cases extraction algorithms can extract as many court cases as possible, always with this incompleteness in mind. And then the lawyer can sell this interface that I just showed based on their own knowledge and the court cases that we extracted to clients, or to use in themselves in order to progress their own decision-making process.
Sorry, you said something that made me reflect. Can you explain what is the work of a logician?
Yes. So logicians differ from other people because in the way that they talk in a formal language. Okay, the logic means that you have some kind of language, which is very similar to the legal language, but it's not ambiguous. It has a very precise understanding, semantics of what it means. And when we say that you need both a logician and a legal expert, it's because the legal language cannot be considered as completely logical in this sense. It has ambiguity, it has other elements which are important in the legal domain, but are impossible for the computer to work with. So a logician here needs to really be able to translate sentences into something the computer can understand.
And can you make a very specific example about what you're talking about? So how would you use logic exactly, like an example? And what does it mean to be not ambiguous?
Right. Well, ambiguity has many different forms. Non-ambiguous means that if you have a sentence like legitimate interest, right? You can say, okay, a lawyer sees that we need to have a legitimate interest, and they know the answer. The computer has no idea what a legitimate interest is, right? It's a very abstract concept. It's a very ambiguous concept. So
True.
You need to break it down into what exactly it means, legitimate interest, in a logical way, into all the components and all the interpretations. And all these interpretations, in fact, are considered as disjunctions, because it's an alternatives to each other, or they might be conjunctions, which mean they must be combined together in order to reach a conclusion. So the logician way of work here is to take this kind of terms based on the legal expert knowledge of what exactly legitimate interest break into in non-ambiguous way to the components that the computer can actually then check and if they are satisfied, and then tell you, okay, you have a legitimate interest.
Yeah, for example, saying, okay, this is the legitimate interest that they're using. You're saying that you can collect this personal data for advertising purposes, and you say that it's a legitimate interest. Let's say whether you can actually use this purpose as a legitimate interest for the processing of the data, and then it can give you answers. Although this is a very thorny question about the legitimate interest. There are a lot of different interpretations coming from different stakeholders. But yeah, so we are rapidly approaching the end, let's say. So maybe just one last question from my side, but then I will open the floor to questions from the audience. And by the way, I also see that Maria Claudia is asking, but aren't all lawyers trained in logic, at least in certain legal systems? I don't know. What about the lawyers that are present here? Are they trained in logic or usually or not? So what, on a final note, will AI-based applications replace lawyers in the future?
So this is a very dangerous question, of course. I think that from our current discussion so far, it's clear that because you need creativity, you need all these kind of elements in the legal decision making, and humans apparently will always be better in this kind of activities. I would say the right answer would be clearly not, right? You will always need humans. But you may ask the question in a different way. Do you actually need creativity? Do you actually need intuition in order to interpret the law? And then when you consider this question, you might see some domains, at least, let's say regulatory compliance, the one I'm dealing with. Maybe you don't want so much creativity in answering questions. Companies need to know if they're compliant or not. Otherwise, they get huge fines. So suddenly comes a lawyer with a very creative solution against or for. This doesn't seem very, very good for the companies. So I would say that if legislators manage to remove this ambiguity and creativity requirements and all the other things from specific regulations, then in the far future where it actually happens, then you might not need lawyer for doing these specific tasks. I think this is an interesting question. I don't know what is the answer. But on the other hand side, I think you can even look at it in a different way. So we said that lawyers will use more and more, hopefully, cognitive applications. So you can ask yourself also, how will the legal domain will look like in the future? So what does it mean that lawyers are using these applications? Is it like Word or sending emails? Or will it completely change how the profession looks like? So here it's very hard, of course, to say anything, but you can look on other examples. If you look on the business world, 20 years ago, nobody knew about machine learning, and people make business decisions based on their human capabilities. Nowadays, every serious business is using a data scientist in order to make much better decisions based on a vast amount of knowledge. Otherwise, they're not competitive. So it seems good that lawyers might need to use these experts in the legal informatics in order to do their job. On the other hand, I also do some research with legal translators in the Court of Justice, in the Parliament, European Parliament, European Commission. And when talking with them, it turns out that 20 years ago, they had 3 translations per day. More or less, they sat down, they had 3 legal documents, they need to translate it into different languages. And they said, okay, nowadays it's very different. Nowadays we use automatic tools to translate it, and our only job is to see both of them on the screen and say, this is a good translation, here you need to fix it. So you need to verify the machine translation. So on the surface, it seems that it's not a big change, right? They do 30 documents per day instead of only 3. So you might say it's not a big change. They still work the same amount of time. But consider, what does it mean that they need now to verify 30 documents? The responsibility is much higher. They have a responsibility now for 30 documents, not for 3. So the parts that they do is much more responsible, much more stressful. And they're not happy. So many of them say their lives were much better 20 years ago. So if you consider a lawyer, let's say the lawyers are using these cognitive apps, like the one I try to build, or we are trying to build. So it means that the lawyer at one point, in order to be competitive, because AI does so much of the work that previously was done by humans, let's say suggesting questions, all the lawyers will need to take more cases, because otherwise they won't be competitive, because the competitor will take more cases, because they can do more cases, because they have more free time. But then the lawyer job will suddenly be only making decisions all the time. So instead of on 3 cases per day, they will need to do it on 10 cases per day. And I would say it seems to me much more stressful. So I'm just saying maybe the future is very interesting to consider also, not only if lawyers will be replaced, but how the legal profession will look like. Of course, this is just speculations here, but I think we should keep it in mind.
What do the audience think? Because when you were talking, like, to me, it's more like, okay, maybe more stressful, maybe more responsibilities. Okay, I don't know that. That's true. But on the other hand, I mean, these kind of applications are helping to automate and streamline very repetitive tasks, or things that take up a lot of time for us as humans, but maybe they're not that creative. Like, for example, we're talking about legal translations, and there are certain things that are very easy to translate, let's say, but then there are a lot of nuances in language that's where the human is actually, for the moment at least, irreplaceable. So it makes, according to me, in terms of efficiency at least, then of course efficiency can have, as you were saying, let's say certain negative consequences on maybe on stress or other kind of emotions. But I would say that now it's like, for the tool that you're building now, it's a way of actually helping people to support their work and to do it in a much more efficient way, and then only focus on what really needs human intelligence.
Right. But this is the first step.
Yeah.
What will happen in 5 years if people will start using cognitive computing applications? It's not clear, because they really affect lots of things. And what I wanted to say is it's not clear how the legal profession will look like. Not only because you start using these tools, but also because you start doing very specific things as a lawyer. There will be no need to do some things anymore. Maybe there are now lawyers who are doing specific things which can be replaced. They're not very creative. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer myself. Maybe there are those lawyers who are only doing creative things. But I guess most of the lawyers are doing both of them. And suddenly those lawyers will be required to only do creative things, because the other things can be done by machines.
Yeah.
So this is something to consider.
Okay, let me then throw here how do you say, like a stone. It's true. I really agree with this, and this is not only true for the legal profession; it's true for many professions. And in the legal profession, there is a whole movement called legal design, which is about bringing design thinking into the legal profession. Also, one of the, let's say, of the goals that this global movement has is that of teaching lawyers also to get more creative at problem solving, especially, but also in general. For example, in terms of compliance, I do not agree with what you said that if companies need to be compliant, sorry, but this is a discussion, open discussion. I do not really agree that companies need to be conservative in their compliance efforts. Actually, I really think, and especially with new data protection, with new AI systems arising, with new, ethical demands, etc. So with the complexity of such systems, actually, you really need to be creative, according to me, to be compliant. Of course, you can base yourself on other things that have been done or always done, so that you're a bit more sure about what you're doing. But then, I don't know. I really think that creativity is going to be very important for the upcoming years. Humans need to develop creativity also, but more in general, I would say there are so many problems that we really need to fix for the whole planet. And in the legal profession, I think it's the same.
These are good news.
Yeah. Maybe if you can write some questions on the chat, or you can also unmute yourself if you would like to ask something to Tomer, since we have the opportunity to ask an expert everything that we have never had the courage to. Otherwise, just to conclude, we are going to, if you want to meet Tomer or the other participants in a one-to-one or even like a small group chats, we're going to move to this link that I'm sharing on the chat, which is a platform for digital, let's say, social hangouts online. And we can meet there in a couple of minutes if you'd like. Maybe just as a final note, I see that there are no questions. Yeah. Okay. In case you have, of course, you can also reach Tomer. I think Tomer, I left the email, your email on the chat. Can you please check whether it's the good one?
It's perfect.
Okay,
Thanks.
Good. So if you want to reach out to Tomer also personally, if you have ideas or use cases, or you just want, as someone said, play with the tool, which is this one, you can reach out to him. You can visit the website that Tomer just shared. That's perfect. With this, yes, I would just like to remind you that if you're in Luxembourg, we're going to meet in person, and the date is going to be announced soon. Maybe in a couple of weeks, just want to be sure that day is going to be as sunny as today. I will be happy to meet you in person again. And I would say, Tomer, thank you so much for being here today. It's been great. The link does not work. Let me check before.
Wait, let me put the right link.
No, I think it's my
your
link.
Okay.
I think it's Wonder. Yeah, it does check. It does work. It does work. Why it's not working? Yeah, for me it does. So, which link are you talking about? The Liga. Maybe it was this one.
Which one? But anyway, I wanted to thank you also very much for the invitation. In fact, normally we all sit, or researchers sit with other researchers and discuss these kind of problems. And the discussions are much more interesting when we have these people from different views. So what you said about creativeness in the compliance field, I didn't think about it at all. For me, it was a yes/no question. And for you, it is, okay, let's be creative and try to be compliant when it's very hard to be compliant. So I really like this idea. So thank you for that.
Also, I'm saying it from a very, from a university point of view. I'm a researcher at the university, and we do need to be compliant with a lot of data protection requirements and ethical requirements, and it's super hard. It's a full-time job if you're doing, for example, user studies with human participants. But even, any case, of course, a lot of research nowadays is based on data and personal data. So if you want to really be compliant, it's very hard, let's say, which can be a use case for your application, but we can speak about this.
Sure, thanks.
So I don't know whether the link is working. Maybe Chuba or Andy, can you write whether the link that you mentioned was the wonder.me? Yes, it works. Okay, perfect, wonderful. So I will move there, and I would really, yes, it's working. Okay. Really like to thank everybody that was here with us today. Really hope to see you soon next time. And thank you, Tomer. Let me stop.
Thank you very much.